Welcome to the Long Way Through Scripture. I'm Catherine Schaefer. This is a slow week-by-week walk through the Bible. Taken without rush or pressure, each week we'll gently orient ourselves to where we are in Scripture, what kind of ground we're walking on, and one simple reflection to carry with us as we read. This isn't a daily reading challenge or a checklist. You can start wherever you are. Move at your own pace, pause when life gets full, or return later. There's no catching up required here. Just the invitation to stay with the text, one passage at a time. And I'm really glad you're here. Let's begin Genesis 12 to 25. As we step into this section of Genesis, the story changes pace in a noticeable way. The opening chapters moved quickly, sweeping across generations and events. Creation, fracture, flood, scattering. Now the camera slows and settles. Instead of following all of humanity, Scripture narrows its focus to one person, one household, one unfolding relationship with God. This is where Abram enters the story. Abram is not introduced as a spiritual hero or a model of certainty. He is not seeking God. He is not portrayed as especially righteous or insightful. God simply speaks and Abram responds by moving. That is the beginning of the story. What God asks of Abram is deceptively simple and deeply destabilizing. Leave your country. Leave your people. Leave what is familiar. Go to a land that God will show him. There is no map, no timeline, no explanation of how the promise will unfold. Just a direction and a word. Blessing is promised without clarity. Calling is given without certainty. Relationship begins without detail. And Abram goes. Scripture does not linger on Abram's internal reasoning. We are not told how afraid he was, or how much he questioned the call, or how he weighed the risks. We are simply shown obedience in motion, trust that is real, but still unformed, faith that exists before understanding. So as the chapter unfolds, you may notice how often God repeats the same promise: land, descendants, blessing. The words return again and again, sometimes in slightly different forms, sometimes almost identical. This repetition is not filler, it is formation. God repeats what is true because time and waiting have a way of eroding confidence. Faith does not fail all at once, it thins gradually. Repetition is how God steadies a promise across years. And Abram's response to that waiting is deeply human. He believes God, and yet he also fears loss. He trusts the promise, and yet he makes choices driven by self-protection. He steps forward in faith and then retreats into caution. He tries to help the promise along when waiting becomes uncomfortable. Scripture does not soften these moments. Abram's fear leads to deception. His impatience leads to complications. His attempts to control the outcome introduce tension into his household and relationships. This is not a failure of faith. It is a portrait of it. Genesis does not present faith as consistency. It presents it as persistence. Abram does not believe perfectly, but he continues to walk with God. He remains in relationship even when he does not understand the timing or the process. One of the quiet strengths of this section is how patient God is. God does not revoke the promise when Abram falters. He does not scold him into obedience or withdraws when fear shows up. Instead, God restates the promise. He expands it, clarifies it, he anchors it more firmly. At one point, God formalizes the promise through a covenant. This is not Abram earning assurance. This is God taking responsibility for fulfillment. God binds himself to the future he has promised. And this moment shifts the weight of the story. From here on, the question is no longer whether Abram can believe well enough. The question becomes whether God will remain faithful over time. And Scripture makes it clear where the emphasis belongs. This section of Genesis spans decades. Long stretches of time pass without recorded encounters with God. Life unfolds in between, ordinary life, complicated life. There are family tensions, conflict between relatives, decisions made under pressure, moments of compromise, of courage, and all of this happens while the promise remains unresolved. The promise is not unfolding instead of Abram's life. It is unfolding within it. And this matters for readers who assume that faith should feel decisive or dramatic. Genesis suggests something quieter and more demanding. Faith often looks like continuing to walk while carrying unanswered questions. It looks like staying in relationship when clarity does not arrive. At times, Abram questions God directly. He asks how the promise will happen. God does not give him a strategy. He gives him presence, assurance, commitment. This is a pattern worth noticing. God does not rush to relieve uncertainty. He stays with Abram inside it. So as you read through Genesis 12 to 25, you may feel the slowness of the story. You may notice repetition. You may feel moments of frustration when the promise seems delayed or complicated. And that reaction is not a reading problem. It is the experience the text is offering. Waiting is not treated as spiritual failure here. It is treated as formation. Silence is not abandonment. It is space where trust is shaped. The story is also honest about the cost of waiting. Waiting stretches relationships. It exposes fear. It invites shortcuts. Abram's story does not hide those tensions. It allows them to be seen. And still, God remains faithful. By the end of this section, not everything is resolved. The promise has begun to take shape, but it is not complete. That incompleteness is intentional. Genesis is teaching us that God's work unfolds over generations, not moments. Faith is not about reaching resolution quickly. It is about remaining present over time. So as you read this week, notice where the story slows. Notice how often God repeats himself. Notice how ordinary life continues around the promise. And carry this reflection with you. God is not in a hurry, and He is not absent in the waiting. Let the gaps remain. Let the questions stay open. Let the story move at its own pace. And as you move into the reading this week, remember there's no rush. Read slowly, read a little at a time, or simply sit with the passages if that's what the week allows. Scripture doesn't ask us to perform, it invites us to remain. You can find the full 52-week reading plan and more information at katherineschaefer.com. Thank you for walking this long way with me. I'll meet you here again next week.